Alright folks, this is the fire department dress uniform tunic worn by Abraham Abe Mulkey. He was kind of an influential person here in Corsicana. He served as the assistant chief in the 1st Corsicana Volunteer Fire Department, along with several other positions that he held. And he was the first person on the scene when Rope Walker fell to his death. We'll tell you more about that in a minute. Hey folks, it's Greg and Janet with Strange RV Tours. Today we're in Corsicana, Texas at a very unique location. I'd like to introduce you guys to Mr. Rope Walker. This is the gravesite of Rope Walker. Here was his original headstone. He died in 1884. Now, Mr. Rope Walker wasn't really Rope Walker. That wasn't his real name. The reason that they gave him that name was that when he died here in Corsicana, nobody knew who he was. He was a guy that would travel from town to town, and he would walk a slack rope, which is similar to a tight rope, which is the reason that they gave him the name Rope Walker, because he was a rope walker. And apparently he had one of his legs was shot off by a cannonball, and so he had a wood peg leg, and he had taken and carved a groove in the bottom of that peg leg so that he could walk a slack rope, which a slack rope is, like I said, similar to a tight rope, except it's a rope that is looped. It's not tight, so it's much harder to walk. And he would come into towns like Corsicana, all over East Texas, and he would basically set a hat out on the ground, and people would pitch money into the hat to see him walk a slack rope across the main street of town. He would hook one end to one building, another end to the opposite building, usually on the main street of town. Here in Corsicana, it was on Beaton Street, which is the main street in downtown. And on this particular day, he decided to add a little excitement to his rope walk, and he was carrying an oven on his back as he attempted to cross the road on the slack rope. Somewhere along the way, Mr. Rope Walker fell to his death. Now, from what we understand from a local historian here, the oven that was on his back was not a big giant like kitchen oven. It was a smaller, probably like a camping oven. But just the fact that a one-legged man could walk a tightrope and do that for a living. Now, this was, you know, after the Civil War, nobody had a lot of money, so we were told by the historian that a lot of people were doing unusual things like sitting on the top of flagpoles, or, you know, walking the edge of tall buildings for money. So this was not unusual for somebody to do something like this in Corsicana. Well, the first man on the scene when Rope Walker fell was Abe, the man that I showed you his fireman's uniform. That's the reason I showed you that uniform. And Rope Walker told him, "I need a rabbi." So they assumed that he was Jewish, and Abe was able to get a rabbi to see him before he passed away. Now, I guess for years and years, nobody knew who Rope Walker really was. Well, his real name was Moses Berg, and he went by the name of Professor Moses occasionally when he would do his tightrope act, but nobody knew who he really was here in Corsicana. And he also had a name of Daniel de Hune. And there's actually a book written within the last 3 or 4 years about Rope Walker. I believe it's available on Amazon, and gives all the details of his life and what happened to him and all of his travels. I just saw it at a local museum here, and I plan on getting it. I believe it was written by Mr. Daniel Yarn. I believe that's what the author's name was. But Rope Walker was an interesting character. Just the idea that, you know, it's kind of like during the barnstorming baseball days when baseball teams would travel from town to town and just raise money having local games against the team's club. He did kind of the same thing. But for years, his tombstone has just said Rope Walker and not his real name.
Hmm.
You have any more information on him, Miss Jan?
Wasn't he like a Russian? He was
Yeah.
from Russia.
Yeah.
I heard that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's funny how somebody finally figured out who he was.
Yeah. And we're going to be heading over here in a few minutes to the downtown area of Corsicana to Beaton Street, so we'll be able to show you the approximate location where the incident happened. So, but they had all kinds of crazy acts and people that would come into town to, you know, jugglers and stuff just to make some money, because there wasn't a lot of money at that time after the Civil War. Everybody was hurting. And these guys were just trying to make a living. It's just a shame he had to die in the way that he did. But anyhow, unusual grave marker here for Mr. Rope Walker. Now we're going to head over to downtown and see Beaton Street. Okay guys, we are on Beaton Street here in Corsicana. This is the old downtown area of Corsicana. This is the main thoroughfare through the downtown area. And it was somewhere in this vicinity where Rope Walker fell to his death. Sorry, a car stopped for me, thought I was trying to cross the road. But basically, Rope Walker would string a rope from like the top of this building here across to the top of the building right here, and it would have a sway in it. It was a slacked rope, it wasn't like a cable, and it was attempting to walk across this road here when he fell to his death. Remember, he had an oven on his back at the time, so if you can imagine, he was a one-legged man with a peg for a leg, wooden peg that he had put a little groove in to help him be able to balance on the rope, trying to walk across that rope with probably 100 pounds on his back, something like that, and fell to his death. And Abe was the first person to the scene to try to help him, but his injuries were bad enough that they couldn't save him. So anyhow, that's the way the story goes, guys. Sad, unusual, but man, times were tough back then.
Strange RV tours will take you places with Greg and Janet's smiling faces. You might see a crazy flavored soda review or some tips to fix your RV too. So come along, won't you join us, friend, as we discover what's around the bend. Just sit right back in your easy chair. Strange RV Tours is on the air. Strange RV Tours is on the air.